The vast, empty sky of the high desert was the color of faded denim, stretched taut over a world of dust and rock. The stagecoach stop was little more than a squat adobe building with a tired-looking sign that creaked in the relentless wind. It was a place for passing through, not for staying. And for Felicity, it felt like the end of the world. Just days ago, she had been full of a hopeful, fluttering fear, traveling with her husband of a few months to a new life in a new territory. He had spoken of opportunity, of land, and a fresh start. But as the landscape grew more rugged and the towns farther apart, the light in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a hard, cold dread. The fear that had been fluttering in her own chest had solidified into a heavy, cold stone. The fear was not just for herself anymore, but for the tiny, growing life she carried within her. She remembered the night it happened. They had been given a small, rough room at the back of the stagecoach office. He had been quiet all evening, his supper barely touched. She had placed a hand on his arm, her voice soft. "We will be all right," she had whispered, trying to believe it herself. "With God's help, we will make a home." He had pulled his arm away as if her touch burned him. In the deep, dark hours of the night, while the desert slept under a blanket of a million stars, he had slipped away. He had taken his bag, his gun, and the small pouch of money that was meant to build their future, leaving behind only a crumpled note on the pillow. The words were seared into her memory, "I cannot do this. I'm sorry." Now she stood alone on the wooden porch, the note clutched in her hand. The stagecoach that had brought them here had long since departed in a cloud of dust, heading east without her. The wind tugged at the edges of her shawl, and she pulled it tighter, not against the chill, but against the crushing weight of her loneliness. She was abandoned, pregnant, and penniless at the edge of nowhere. A single hot tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. She had to be strong. For the baby. The stagecoach agent was a kind, weary-eyed woman named Martha, who had seen everything come and go on this lonely stretch of trail. She had found Felicity weeping silently on the porch that first morning. Without a word of judgment, Martha had taken her inside, given her a cup of bitter, strong coffee, and listened to her fractured story. Martha's heart, though hardened by the desert sun, was not made of stone. She saw the desperate goodness in Felicity's eyes and the protective way her hand rested on her still flat stomach. "You can't stay out here, child," Martha had said, her voice raspy. "And you can't get on a coach with no ticket." So a bargain was struck. Felicity could stay in the small, windowless storage room at the back of the office. It was crowded with sacks of grain and smelled of leather and dust, but it had a cot and a roof. In return, she would help Martha with the endless chores, sweeping the hard-packed dirt floors, washing the few dishes, mending the linens, and helping to prepare meals for the rare passengers who stopped for a brief rest. It was a hard, humble existence, but it was safe. Days bled into one another, marked only by the arrival and departure of the coach. Felicity spent her hours working and praying. She prayed for strength. She prayed for her unborn child. She prayed for a path forward, for a sign of what she was supposed to do. She felt like a tiny lost sheep, and she begged the Good Shepherd to find her and lead her home. One afternoon, a few days after her world had collapsed, the sound of wagon wheels and the soft snorts of horses broke the usual silence. Felicity, who was sweeping the porch, looked up. A man was climbing down from the driver's seat of a simple, sturdy farm wagon. He was tall and lean, his face tanned and lined from a life spent outdoors. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. This was Micah. But it was the two small children in the wagon bed that caught and held Felicity's attention. A little girl who looked to be about 6 sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She had wide, serious eyes that seemed to take in everything and reveal nothing. A boy, perhaps 4, fidgeted beside her, his curiosity immediately sparking as he looked at Felicity. Their clothes were clean but well worn, and there was a quietness about them that spoke of a sadness too big for such small shoulders. Martha came out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Micah," she greeted him with a familiar nod. "Here for that harness repair?" "Yes, ma'am." Micah's voice was low and calm. He helped the children down from the wagon. The little boy immediately tried to run towards a stray chicken, but Micah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Benjamin, stay close." The boy stilled, looking up at his father with complete trust. The girl, Abigail, simply moved to stand slightly behind her father's leg, peering out at Felicity. As Micah conducted his business with Martha, Felicity watched the children. Her heart, which had felt so numb, gave a sudden, painful squeeze. They were so young, so quiet. She saw the way Abigail subtly straightened the collar of Benjamin's shirt, a tiny motherly gesture. Without even thinking, Felicity knelt down, ignoring the dust that smudged her skirt. She smiled at Benjamin. "That's a fine chicken, isn't it?" she said softly. "Do you have chickens at your home?" Benjamin, emboldened by her kind tone, nodded vigorously. "We have a rooster. He's noisy." Felicity laughed, a genuine warm sound that felt strange to her own ears. "Roosters are very good at their job. They tell everyone when the sun is up." She then looked at Abigail, offering the same gentle smile. "You must be a very good helper for your pa." Abigail didn't speak, but she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes locked on Felicity's face. From the doorway, Martha watched this small exchange. She saw the way Felicity's entire being softened when she spoke to the children. She saw the way Benjamin responded to a kind female voice, and how Abigail, usually so withdrawn, was studying Felicity with a deep, quiet intensity. An idea, sudden and clear, began to form in Martha's practical mind. She looked at Micah, a good man, worn thin by grief and the sheer hard work of raising two young ones alone. She looked at Felicity, a good woman, cast aside and with nowhere to go. It was a desperate idea, a risky one, but in this hard land, sometimes the most desperate ideas were the only ones that held any hope. Later, as Micah was loading the repaired harness into his wagon, Martha approached him. "Micah," she began, her voice dropping. "That young woman, Felicity. She was left here by her husband. She's with child and she's got no family, no money." Micah paused, his gaze drifting to where Felicity was now drawing a picture in the dust for Benjamin, making the boy giggle. He saw the sadness in her eyes but also the kindness. "That's a hard lot," he said quietly. "It is," Martha agreed. "She needs to get to Cedar Ridge. Heard there's work there. It's on your way more or less. I don't suppose you'd have room in your wagon for a passenger?" Micah was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving from Felicity to his own children. He saw the way Benjamin was now clinging to Felicity's skirt, and how Abigail was standing just a little bit closer to her than before. He heard Martha's unspoken words. It wasn't just about a ride. He looked at the lonely young woman and then at his motherless children, and a profound aching need echoed in his own heart. The silence stretched out, filled only by the whispering wind and the distant cry of a hawk, as a cowboy considered a simple act of kindness that could change all of their lives forever. The silence that followed Martha's question was a heavy, living thing. Micah stood by his wagon, one hand resting on the rough wood of the sideboard. His gaze was fixed on his children. He saw Benjamin, who had been so shy just moments before, now clutching a fold of Felicity's dusty skirt as if it were a lifeline. He saw Abigail, his quiet shadow, standing close enough to the young woman to hear the soft rustle of her dress when she moved. It was more than he had seen his daughter do with anyone but him in over a year. The sight sent a pang through him, a mixture of hope and a deep, familiar sorrow. He looked at Felicity, then truly looked at her. He saw the weariness in her stance, the faint tracks of old tears on a face that was too young for such hardship. But he also saw the gentle curve of her smile as she listened to Benjamin's chatter, and the steady patience in her eyes. She was not broken by her circumstances. She was weathering them, like a sapling bending in a strong wind but not snapping. Martha's words echoed in his mind. She was left here. She's with child. He knew the brutal honesty of this land. A woman alone in her condition had few choices, and most of them were bleak. The journey to Cedar Ridge was long, and even if she made it, there was no true promise of safety at the other end. Finally, he turned his head and gave Martha a slow, single nod. "I've got room," he said, his voice low and even. "We leave at first light." The relief on Felicity's face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. Her shoulders, which had been held so tight with worry, slumped slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Micah. I can help with the children on the journey. I can earn my passage." That night, Felicity lay on her narrow cot in the storage room, listening to the wind moan around the corners of the building. She was leaving this lonely stop, but she was traveling into the unknown with a man she did not know and his two quiet children. She folded her hands over her middle, where the baby was still too small to show, and she prayed. She prayed for protection, for guidance, and for the strength to be useful, to not be a burden to this serious, sad-eyed cowboy and his little family. The next morning, the sky was just beginning to lighten from black to a deep, bruised gray when Micah's wagon pulled up in front of the stagecoach stop. The air was cold and sharp. Felicity, having said a tearful goodbye to a stoic Martha, climbed carefully into the back of the wagon. Micah had arranged sacks of grain and a rolled-up blanket to make a somewhat comfortable seat for her. Abigail and Benjamin were already there, bundled in warm coats, their eyes wide in the pre-dawn gloom. The journey began in near silence, the only sounds the steady clop of the horses' hooves, the creak of the wagon, and the endless sigh of the wind. The desert slowly revealed itself as the sun rose, painting the rocky landscape in shades of gold and rust. Felicity watched the vast empty beauty of it, feeling both incredibly small and yet a part of something immense. After a few hours, Benjamin began to fidget, growing tired of sitting still. He whined softly, and Micah, from his seat up front, spoke a quiet word that did little to soothe the boy. Without being asked, Felicity began to hum a soft, wordless hymn. Then she started to speak in a low, storytelling voice. She told them about a brave little mouse who lived in a church and had adventures with the friendly sparrows in the rafters. She made her voice squeaky for the mouse and chirpy for the birds. Benjamin's whining stopped. He listened enthralled. Even Abigail, who had been staring fixedly at the horizon, turned her head slightly to listen. At midday they stopped by a dry creek bed to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of cold biscuits and dried meat. Micah helped the children down and Felicity stretched her stiff legs. Benjamin immediately ran to investigate a line of ants marching along the ground. Abigail stood by her father's side, but her eyes followed Felicity as she carefully spread a blanket on a flat rock for them to sit on. "It's a mighty fine thing you're doing, giving her a chance," Micah said to Felicity as he handed her a water canteen. His words were simple, but his meaning was deep. "It is a mighty fine thing you are doing, giving me one," Felicity replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I will not forget your kindness, Mr. Micah." "Just Micah is fine," he said. As they continued their journey in the afternoon, the silence between them felt less heavy, more comfortable. The children, lulled by the motion of the wagon and the warmth of the sun, both fell asleep, leaning against Felicity's sides. She carefully adjusted her shawl to cover Benjamin's small shoulders, and she let Abigail's head rest against her arm. She looked down at their sleeping faces and a powerful protective feeling swelled in her chest. They were so trusting, so in need of a mother's care. When they made camp for the night, the dynamic had shifted. While Micah saw to the horses and built a small, efficient fire, Felicity kept the children occupied. She showed Abigail how to arrange the bedrolls and she played a simple clapping game with Benjamin that made him laugh aloud, a sound that seemed to startle the quiet evening air. Micah paused in his work, watching them. The sound of his son's laughter was a rare and precious gift. After a simple supper of beans warmed over the fire, Micah put the children to bed in the wagon. The vast canopy of stars overhead was brilliant and cold. He sat down on a log across the fire from Felicity, the flames painting dancing shadows on his face. The silence stretched, but it was a thoughtful one. "My wife Rachel," he began, his voice so low Felicity had to lean forward to hear. "She took a fever. It was quick. 1 week she was here, the next." He trailed off, picking up a stick and poking at the fire. "The ranch is a lonely place for little ones. Abigail hasn't spoken more than a handful of words since her mama passed. Benjamin, he cries for her in the night. I do my best, but a man's best isn't always enough for a little girl's heart." Felicity listened, her heart aching for his loss, for their loss. "I understand lonely," she said softly. "My husband, he was afraid. Of the land, of the work. Of the baby." She took a deep breath, the confession hurting but feeling necessary. "He said he couldn't do it. So he left. He took the money and he left me there." She looked into the flames, feeling the shame and the hurt of it all over again. "I thought God had abandoned me. But then you came." The fire crackled between them. The immensity of the desert night pressed in, making their small camp feel like an island. Micah looked from Felicity's face, etched with pain and faith, toward the wagon where his children slept. He thought of Rachel, of the love they had shared, and the hollow emptiness her passing had left. He thought of the silent, grinding work of each day, and the fear that he was failing his children. He saw in Felicity not just a stranded woman, but a possible answer to a prayer he had been too grief-stricken to even form. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers in the flickering light. His expression was solemn, his gaze steady. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his words measured and deliberate. "It ain't a romantic one. It's one of plain, hard fact." He took a deep breath. "My children need a mother. They need the kind of love and gentleness you showed them today. And you need a home. A safe place for your baby." Felicity's breath caught in her throat. She sat perfectly still, her eyes wide. "I am a man of my word," Micah continued. I can offer you my name and my protection. I will be a faithful husband to you, and I will provide for you and for your child as if it were my own flesh and blood. I will honor you and care for you. In return, I am asking you to be a wife to me in name, and a mother to my children in heart." He paused, letting the weight of his offer settle in the night air. It would be a marriage of convenience, a partnership. We could help each other. Felicity stared at him, her mind reeling. A marriage proposal from a man she had known for less than a day. It was madness. It was also the only real hope that had been offered to her since she was left at that stagecoach stop. She looked at this man, serious, grieving but clearly good and honest. She thought of Abigail's quiet eyes and Benjamin's trusting hand. She thought of the baby growing inside her, who needed a father, a home, a future. She closed her eyes and sent a silent, desperate prayer heavenward. Is this the path? Is this the way you are providing? When she opened them, she felt a strange, solid calm settle over her. It was not the dizzying joy of a young girl in love. It was the steady, resolute peace of a woman making a solemn choice for survival, for family, for faith. She looked directly at Micah, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Yes," she said. "I will marry you." The journey to Micah's ranch was completed in a new and different silence. The heavy uncertainty was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of a momentous decision. They were no longer a kind cowboy, a stranded woman, and two quiet children. They were a family, or the beginnings of one, bound by a promise made under a blanket of stars. The landscape began to change as they traveled, the harsh, open desert slowly giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and juniper. Then they came over a rise and Felicity saw it. Micah's ranch lay in a shallow, green valley. A creek, lined with cottonwood trees, snaked through the middle of it. The house itself was a simple, solid structure of weathered timber with a stone chimney. A corral held a few horses and a red-painted barn stood proudly to one side. It was not grand, but it was sturdy and well cared for. It looked like a place that could be a home. As the wagon rolled to a stop, the front door of the house opened and an older couple emerged, their faces breaking into warm smiles. Micah had explained that his nearest neighbors, Joseph and Hannah, who lived a mile over the ridge, had promised to look in on the children. They had been a godsend after Rachel's passing. "Micah, welcome back," Joseph called out, his voice a friendly boom. Hannah was already moving toward the wagon, her eyes immediately going to Felicity with a kind and curious warmth. "These are our neighbors, Joseph and Hannah," Micah said, helping Felicity down from the wagon. "They've been a great help to us." He then turned to the couple. "This is Felicity. We are to be married." There was a moment of surprised silence, but Hannah, a practical woman with eyes that missed nothing, saw the way Benjamin immediately reached for Felicity's hand. She saw the protective way Micah stood near her. Her surprise melted into a genuine, beaming smile. "Well, isn't that wonderful news? Blessing indeed. Welcome, my dear." The next few days were a whirlwind of quiet activity. Hannah insisted on helping Felicity settle in. The house was clean but held the stark, lonely feeling of a place missing a woman's touch. There were few decorations and a layer of dust covered the shelves. Felicity set to work with a determined energy. She did not try to erase the memory of Rachel. That would have been cruel and impossible. Instead, she worked to bring life back into the home. She beat the dust out of the rugs, washed the windows until they shone, and arranged a small bouquet of wildflowers Hannah had brought on the rough-hewn wooden table. Micah, for his part, was a man of his word. He was respectful and kind, but he gave her space. He moved his things out of the larger bedroom and into the smaller one next to the children's room, leaving the main room for Felicity and the coming baby. He did not question her when she used a little of their precious sugar to make a small cake for the children. He simply watched, a thoughtful look in his eyes as Benjamin's eyes lit up with joy. One evening, Micah came in from the barn carrying a piece of sanded pine wood and his carving tools. He sat by the fireplace and without a word began to work. For the next several nights, this was his routine. Felicity would mend clothes by the lamplight, Abigail would play quietly with a cornhusk doll, and Benjamin would eventually fall asleep with his head in Felicity's lap. And Micah would carve. Slowly, under his skilled hands, the block of wood began to take shape. It became a cradle, small and perfectly formed, with smooth, curved rockers. It was a physical promise, a testament to his vow to care for her child as his own. The wedding was set for a Saturday. Hannah and Joseph spread the word, and when the day came, a few other families from the scattered ranches in the valley arrived on wagons and horseback. The traveling preacher, a man named Elias with a kind face and a loud, joyful voice, stood with them in front of the fireplace. It was not a fancy ceremony. Felicity wore her best dress, the one she had been abandoned in, but Hannah had pinned a fresh sprig of sage to the collar, filling the air with its clean scent. Micah stood tall and serious in a clean shirt. Abigail and Benjamin, washed and dressed in their Sunday best, stood beside them, holding hands. Benjamin fidgeted, but Abigail watched everything with a solemn, intense focus. Preacher Elias spoke of the solemn vows of marriage, of fidelity and protection, of the joining of two lives in the eyes of God. He spoke of the importance of a family built on faith and mutual respect. When he asked Micah if he would take Felicity to be his wife, to love and cherish her, Micah's "I will" was clear and firm, a public echo of his private promise under the desert stars. When Felicity promised to be Micah's wife to honor him, her voice was steady, her eyes holding his. There was no kiss to seal the vows, that was not part of their agreement. Instead, they simply turned and faced their small community as husband and wife. After the simple ceremony, the neighbors shared a meal. There was roasted chicken and fresh bread, and Hannah had brought a dried apple pie. There was laughter and talking, and for a few hours, the little ranch house was filled with a warmth and noise it had not known in a very long time. Felicity moved among the guests, a quiet smile on her face, but her heart was full of a profound and peaceful gratitude. She had a home. She had a family. That night, as the last of the guests departed and the children were put to bed, the house fell into a deep quiet. Felicity stood in the main room, now her room, and looked at the sturdy cradle Micah had made, sitting empty but waiting near the bed. She could hear the soft sounds of Micah moving around in his room next door. They were married, yet they were strangers still, bound by a promise and a shared purpose. They were two separate rooms in the same house, two separate lives that had chosen to grow side by side, like the trees by the creek, their roots slowly, surely, beginning to intertwine in the rich soil of shared responsibility, kindness, and a fledgling, fragile trust. The promise had been made. Now, the real work of building a life together had begun. The weeks following the wedding settled into a gentle, steady rhythm on the ranch, a rhythm as natural and predictable as the sunrise over the eastern ridge. Felicity's presence in the house was like a slow-burning fire, warming the corners that had been cold for so long. She established a routine of baking bread on Tuesdays and churning butter on Thursdays. The smell of simmering stew and freshly baked biscuits became the signature scent of the home, a welcome change from the simple, repetitive meals Micah had managed alone. Her relationship with the children deepened in quiet, profound ways. Benjamin, who had been so quick to attach himself to her, now followed her around the house and yard like a cheerful shadow, chattering about everything he saw. He had begun to call her Mama Felicity, a title that sent a thrill of joy and responsibility straight to her heart. It was Abigail, however, whose transformation was the most remarkable. The silent, watchful girl began to emerge from her shell. She started by simply standing closer to Felicity while she worked. Then she began to help, silently handing Felicity clothespins as she hung the laundry or carefully stirring a pot on the stove. One evening, as Felicity was reading a Bible story aloud, Abigail, without a word, climbed into the chair beside her and leaned her head against Felicity's arm. It was a small gesture, but to Micah, watching from his chair by the fire, it felt like a miracle. Micah and Felicity's own relationship was a slow, careful dance of growing respect and shared purpose. They spoke of the ranch, of the children, of the weather and the crops. They worked side by side in the garden Felicity had started, their hands sometimes brushing in the rich soil. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the children play, discussing the plans for the new pasture or the need to mend a fence. It was a partnership built on action and care, not on grand words or romantic gestures. He saw how her kindness was healing his children, and her gratitude for the safety and home he provided was evident in every loaf of bread she baked and every stitch she sewed. A quiet fondness was growing between them, as steady and strong as the timbers of the house. Then, one bitterly cold night in the deep of winter, the rhythm was broken. A sharp, insistent pain woke Felicity from a deep sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the window pane. For a moment she was disoriented, but then another pain, stronger this time, clenched her middle and she knew. The baby was coming. A flicker of fear went through her. They were miles from town and the snow was falling thick and fast outside her window. She took a deep, calming breath, remembering the verses she had clung to at the stagecoach stop. Be strong and of good courage, do not be afraid, for the Lord your God is with you. She lit the lamp by her bed and managed to make her way to the door of her room. She called out, her voice surprisingly steady. Micah? He was at her door in moments, his hair tousled from sleep, his eyes immediately alert. He took in her pale face and the way she held onto the doorframe. Understanding dawned on his face, and for a single unguarded moment, she saw a flash of pure panic in his eyes. It was the same look he must have had when his first wife fell ill. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a grim, determined calm. "The baby is coming," Felicity said softly. "We need the doctor." Micah nodded, already moving. "I'll saddle Jasper. He's the fastest in this weather." He helped her back to her bed, his touch firm and sure. "I'll be back as quick as I can. Hannah will come." He then turned and hurried into the children's room, waking a sleepy Abigail. He spoke to her in low, urgent tones Felicity could not hear. Within minutes he was gone, the sound of his horse's galloping hooves quickly swallowed by the storm. Felicity lay in the quiet house, the only sounds the howling wind and her own rapid breathing. The pains were coming faster now. She closed her eyes and prayed, not for herself, but for Micah's safety on the treacherous trail and for the life of the child she carried. She was not alone for long. She heard the soft pad of bare feet and then felt a small, cool hand on her forehead. She opened her eyes to see Abigail standing by her bed, her face pale but her expression resolute. In her hands she carried a basin of water and a clean cloth, just as Felicity had done for her when she had a nightmare. "Papa said to help," Abigail whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost inaudible. It was the first time she had spoken directly to Felicity without being asked a question. Tears of gratitude and pain welled in Felicity's eyes. "Thank you, my dear girl," she managed to say. "That is a great help." As the night wore on, Abigail was a quiet pillar of strength. She refilled the water basin, she wiped Felicity's brow with the cool cloth, and she held her hand during the worst of the pains, her small fingers gripping Felicity's tightly. Benjamin, awakened by the commotion, stood crying in the doorway until Abigail, with a maturity far beyond her years, went and led him to his bed, singing him the same soft lullaby Felicity always sang. She was being the mother she had so desperately missed, and in doing so she was cementing her bond with Felicity forever. It felt like an eternity before they heard the sound of not one, but two horses arriving, and then the blessed sound of the door opening, bringing in a blast of cold air and the sturdy, capable figure of the doctor from town, followed closely by a snow-covered, anxious Micah and a breathless Hannah, who immediately took charge of the children. The doctor shooed everyone else out and closed the bedroom door. Micah paced the main room, his boots sounding heavily on the wooden floor. He listened to the sounds from the other room, his face a mask of strained helplessness. He was not just worrying about the baby, he was worrying about Felicity. The woman who had brought light back into his home, who had coaxed a smile from his daughter, who had filled his lonely house with warmth and purpose. The thought of losing her was a terror far greater than any blizzard. He dropped to his knees right there in the middle of the room, and he prayed as he had not prayed since Rachel died. He prayed for her safety, for her strength, for the life of the child he had promised to raise as his own. After a long, tense time, the bedroom door opened. The doctor emerged, wiping his hands on a towel, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "It's a girl," he announced. "A fine, healthy girl. And the mother is tired, but she is strong and well." The relief that washed over Micah was so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. He stepped into the room. Felicity was propped up on the pillows, her face drawn and exhausted, but her eyes were shining with a radiant, triumphant light. In her arms, swaddled tightly in a soft blanket, was a tiny, perfect baby with a shock of dark hair. Micah approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the baby, then at Felicity. The emotions he had been holding back all night, the fear, the hope, the profound respect, swelled within him, finally breaking through the careful walls of their agreement. "What will you name her?" he asked, his voice thick with feeling. Felicity looked from the sleeping infant in her arms to the man who had saved her, who had given her a home and a family, and who had just ridden through a storm to bring her help. She thought of the hope that had felt so lost at the stagecoach stop, and the hope that had been reborn here in this simple, sturdy house. "Hope," she said softly, her gaze meeting his. "Her name is Hope." Micah reached out a calloused, gentle finger and touched the baby's tiny hand. Hope wrapped her miniature fingers around his, and in that moment, something in Micah's heart, long frozen by grief, cracked wide open. He was not just looking at Felicity's child. He was looking at his daughter. And he was not just looking at a woman he had promised to protect. He was looking at the woman he had, against all odds and all his own expectations, grown to deeply and truly love. The seasons turned on the ranch, as steady and sure as the flow of the creek through the cottonwood trees. The deep snows of the winter that had welcomed baby Hope into the world melted away into a spring bursting with wildflowers. The green shoots of the garden Felicity had planted pushed through the rich, dark earth, and the air was filled with the sounds of new life, the bleating of new lambs, the chirping of returning birds, and the delighted giggles of a baby discovering the world. Hope grew from a tiny swaddled infant into a bright-eyed baby who watched everything with curious wonder. Her first real smile was bestowed upon Benjamin, who made silly faces for her until she erupted into a gummy grin. Her first unsteady attempts at crawling were across the floor toward Abigail, who would patiently sit and hold out a wooden block as a prize. She was the joyful heart of the home, a living, breathing reminder of the promise that had been made and kept. The rhythm of their lives continued, but the music of it had changed. The careful, respectful partnership between Micah and Felicity began to bloom with a new and tender warmth. It was in the way Micah would now sometimes take Felicity's hand in his when they said grace before a meal, his work-roughened fingers gently enclosing hers. It was in the way Felicity would reach up and smooth the worry from his brow when he came in from a hard day's work, her touch a quiet comfort he had not realized he was missing. They still lived in their separate rooms, honoring the practical beginnings of their marriage, but the space between them felt smaller every day. They were no longer just two people sharing a roof and a family, they were two hearts being woven together by shared experience, mutual respect, and a love that had grown as quietly and strongly as the oak tree in the yard. One warm summer evening, with the fireflies dancing like scattered embers in the twilight, the family sat together on the porch. Hope was asleep in the cradle Micah had carved, which now sat in a place of honor in the main room. Benjamin, tired from a day of adventure, was curled up on a blanket, his head in Felicity's lap. Abigail sat on the steps, leaning back against her father's legs as he sat in his rocking chair. Felicity sat beside him, mending one of Benjamin's shirts by the last of the fading light. The peace was deep and complete, broken only by the crickets and the soft creak of Micah's chair. He had been quiet for a long time, watching his family. He watched Felicity's capable hands, needle flashing in and out of the fabric. He saw the absolute trust with which his children leaned against them both. He looked at the house, which was no longer just a building but a home, filled with laughter, prayer, and love. He thought of the lonely, grieving man he had been just a year before, and his heart swelled with a gratitude so powerful it felt like a physical ache. He stopped rocking and turned to fully face Felicity. The setting sun cast a golden glow on her face, and in that moment she looked to him like everything he had ever prayed for without knowing the words. "Felicity," he began, his voice low and earnest, cutting through the gentle evening sounds. She looked up from her mending, her needle stilling. She saw the serious, tender look in his eyes, a look that was different from any he had given her before. "I made you a promise out on the trail," he said, his gaze holding hers. "I promised you my name and my protection. I promised to be a faithful husband and a father to your child." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I have tried to keep that promise." "You have," Felicity whispered, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. "You have given us more than I ever dreamed possible." "But a man's heart can make promises his words don't know how to say," Micah continued, leaning forward slightly. "That promise I made was from a place of need. It was a good promise and I meant every word. But what I feel now, it comes from a different place entirely." He reached out and took her hand, the mending forgotten in her lap. Benjamin, half asleep, stirred but did not wake. "When I rode through that storm to fetch the doctor," Micah said, his voice thick with memory, "I wasn't just afraid for the baby. I was terrified of losing you. And when I saw you holding our Hope, I didn't see a woman I had a bargain with. I saw the bravest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. The woman I love." Tears filled Felicity's eyes, spilling over and tracing paths down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of a joy so profound it could find no other outlet. "My promise to you now is the same, but it's more," he said, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "It's not just a promise of protection. It's a promise of my whole heart. I don't just want to be your husband in name. I want to be your husband in every way that God intended. I love you, Felicity. You are my wife in my heart, truly and fully, now and forever." Felicity looked at this good, strong, gentle man. She looked at the family they had built together from the broken pieces of their pasts. She thought of the faith that had carried her to this porch, to this moment. The love she had carefully guarded in her own heart, not daring to hope it would be returned, now bloomed openly and without fear. "And I love you, Micah," she said, her voice clear and sure despite the tears. "My heart has been yours for a long time. You are my husband and my best friend and the great love of my life." He leaned forward then and for the first time he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion but of promise, a tender, solemn seal on the vows their hearts had just spoken. It was a beginning, the true beginning of their life together as one. On the steps, Abigail watched them, a quiet, knowing smile on her face. She laid her head back against her father's leg, feeling the solid, happy certainty of her world. The family on the porch was no longer a patchwork of lost souls, but a single, unbreakable tapestry, woven with threads of loss, faith, kindness, and a love that would last forever. They had journeyed through the desert of loneliness and arrived in the promised land of a shared heart, a testament to the truth that God can indeed make all things new. If this story of faith, hope, and love's ability to heal the deepest wounds touched your heart, there are many more tales waiting to be shared. To journey with other characters as they find their way through hardship to redemption, to be reminded of the beauty of second chances and the strength found in belief, we invite you to join our community. Subscribe to the channel, and let these stories be a lantern for your own path, a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, a new dawn is always waiting to break. Your support helps us continue to create these narratives of hope. Subscribe now.